Thank you everyone for joining the session. We've got another great Citrix Troubleshooting Masterclass in store for you. Today we're tackling the vague and dreaded Citrix is slow complaint, one that everybody I think is very familiar with, and one that seems to put the Citrix team on the defensive. So we're going to talk about ways not only to troubleshoot issues and solve problems, but also how to prove when it's not Citrix. So we'll dig into that. George has some great stories for us. We're joined by George Spiers today. He should be no stranger to this audience, former Citrix CTP. He's also an epic ECSA. We also have Martin Quinnen, who is one of our client success engineers, and he and George are going to be doing most of the conversation today, digging into the use cases and troubleshooting. And then I will do just a quick introduction here at the beginning. So just sort of what you can expect. We want this to be engaging. So ask questions. There's a question and answer panel in the GoToWebinar toolbar. So at any point, ask your questions. Many of you submitted questions when you registered, so thank you for that. So we've got some preloaded questions for that, but we'd like to take any additional questions that you guys have during the session. So feel free to put those in at any time. We'll do a quick poll to kick us off. And then after the webinar, once you log out, there's a quick 3-question survey. So if you wouldn't mind filling that out, it just helps us to make sure that we're improving the sessions and delivering content that you guys are expecting and looking for. So our agenda today, we're going to start with just a quick introduction. We don't always do an introduction to who Goliath is, but there's a lot of newcomers on the Troubleshooting Masterclass this time. So I'm just going to do an introduction, talk about IT observability and how Goliath helps in that space. And then, like I said, we're going to do a quick poll, and then we'll jump right into the heart of the content, which is our troubleshooting use cases. And we'll look at things that come in typically as Citrix is slow or vague complaints, but generally speaking, have a specific root cause. So we'll look at VDI and Citrix double hop scenarios. We'll look at a scenario where Citrix is slow was the complaint, but it ended up being an isolated VPN issue. We're going to look at some logon slowness that happened in a Windows 10 to Windows 11 migration, and then a scenario where an application is down. In this case, this example, it was Epic, but it could be any business or clinical application. And then we'll take time at the end for any questions that you all might have. All right. So to get us started, quick poll. Give me just one moment to launch it. Here we go. All right, so which Citrix end user experience issues have you spent the most time troubleshooting in the last 6 months? I believe you can actually select multiple. And for most of you, it's probably multiple, but just curious which ones are the ones plaguing everyone the most. This also helps us inform or helps inform us on content and topics for future webinars. So yeah, it looks like most of you, Citrix is slow is sort of the vague complaint that's coming in. 64% of you are saying that. Evenly spread across the others. All right, great. Thank you for that. So we're definitely hitting on the right topic, since the vast majority of you said Citrix is slow is where you're spending most of your time. So good, that aligns well. All right, so just as a quick intro for those of you who are new, if you haven't heard of Goliath or you're not familiar with us, we do IT observability for any VDI or DAS platform. It doesn't matter if it's on-prem, cloud, or hybrid. So whether you're on Citrix, which is the focus of today's webinar, many of you have already indicated to us that you're moving off of Citrix and moving to AVD or some other DAS platforms. So we help with all of that. It doesn't matter, we're agnostic with that respect. But we enable IT teams to move from a reactive posture to a proactive posture. And we're doing that by giving you the ability to anticipate issues before end users are impacted. When issues do come up, though, the ability to be able to troubleshoot them quickly and then providing the documentation for you to be able to prove root cause of end user experience, and which is perfect when we're talking about vague Citrix is slow, because the ability to prove that it is Citrix or isn't Citrix, or the ability to prove that it was remediated becomes really important, or at least that's what we're told when we talk to IT admins and IT teams. You all are no strangers to the complexity of the IT infrastructure. Part of the problem is there's 15, 20, sometimes more unaffiliated vendor technologies that are working in concert to actually deliver a good end user experience. And Citrix is only a piece of that complexity. So, you know, it takes purpose-built technology to actually identify within this mesh of integrated technologies which IT element is actually the piece that's responsible for the poor performance in the end user that the end users are experiencing. And of course, they blame the last thing they interacted with, which is usually they clicked on their little Citrix icon, their workspace app icon, and something didn't happen as they expected, and so therefore Citrix is at fault. But as you all know, it could be a number of other reasons. Part of the other problem too when you're troubleshooting is you're dealing with a lot of people in all different IT silos, subjective and objective inputs, but this leads to a lot of variability. So there's probably in your organization a lot of different monitoring tools across the IT stack. The issue with that is that each of those monitoring tools, those are siloed into the different pieces of the technology stack, and they're focused on their own piece. They're great tools, they do a great job for what they're designed to do, but again, they're solely there to monitor their own technology. So if it's endpoints, it's network, storage, servers, it's a lot of different monitoring tools, and none of them are correlating that data across the rest of the IT infrastructure. So, you know, a typical approach for most organizations might be that they look at each IT element individually, each one looks healthy, so therefore the end user experience must be good as well. The problem though is and it gets frustrating when you pull together like an incident response team or whatever that team looks like in your organization. Everybody's coming in, they're saying, yep, each monitoring component says everything is good, but the end user is still having an issue. And this is when the finger pointing starts. So, you know, how do you go to the networking team, for instance, and tell them that bandwidth is the issue when you don't actually have any data points to prove it, but their monitoring tools are telling them everything is fine? So we take a different approach. We're sort of flipping the paradigm a bit on how IT troubleshoots end user experience issues. And instead of trying to infer the quality of end user experience issues or end user experience based on the individual elements, we're starting with the end user and then we're informing outwardly. So we can quickly identify which ones, sometimes multiple, IT elements are impacting that end user experience. And then we serve that data up, correlated into a single view so that the IT team can quickly identify the root cause and then communicate amongst each other across the different siloed constituents. So that's a little bit about what Goliath does. If there's anybody that would like a little bit more detailed information specifically about Goliath, happy to have that conversation with you all. That's not what the intent of today's webinar is. We're going to jump right into some troubleshooting scenarios. But if that's something you're interested in, just type learn more into the question and answer pane, and we'll make sure we contact you and get you some more information. But with that, I want to bring George and Martin in. We're going to jump right into our troubleshooting use cases. So we're going to kick it off with that VDI Citrix double hop scenario. Again, this is a scenario where a VDI resource issue is actually blamed on Citrix. So the Citrix team were the first ones to take the shots. But then after doing some digging, it wasn't a Citrix issue at all. Then we'll look at another situation with an isolated VPN issue. This is one where, you know, the issue escalated through management. Management thought there was a problem for everyone and ended up being more isolated. These are the kind of things that you guys are dealing with on a daily basis. New migration to Windows 11 caused logon slowness issues. How do you prove it? Is it Citrix that's the issue? That's the issue? Is it the fact that, you know, you migrated and there's something wrong with Windows 11? What users know is there's something new, so it must be that's the issue. And then we'll finish off with again, an application availability issue. In this particular use case, it was specific to the Epic EHR. But with that, let me bring in Martin and George. And Martin, let me go ahead and give you sharing capabilities here.
Awesome.
There you go. You should have it now, Martin.
Perfect. And let me go ahead and pull this up. All right, I will have to move our meeting out of the way. Apologies. Is that all coming up okay?
Yep, looking good.
All right, awesome. So first scenario we wanted to dive into was the issue that comes from, say, a Citrix team and is sort of blamed on, and say, for example, a common double hop scenario we see is out to something like an Oracle or Epic hosted EHR environment. A lot of customers come in with a on-premise, say, VDI solution. So we have two independent connections going on every time someone goes to connect. George, I'll let you kind of start in with some of the times we see this at health systems and potential pitfalls with routing that type of an issue.
Yeah, of course. So it can be a little bit, I guess, common in healthcare environments where you may have a health organization which supply published desktops, VDI desktops via Citrix, and then users would access an application within the Citrix desktop. Now, it could actually also be Omnissa. It doesn't have to be Citrix, but you're logging into a VDI desktop, and then you will access an application from within that desktop, which is also provided by another virtualization stack. Could be Citrix, could be Omnissa. In healthcare, sometimes we see that where the Epic or Oracle application is hosted by another third-party provider. Now, in this scenario, was actually Oracle, which was the application. So users accessed a VDI desktop from Omnissa, and then from within that VDI desktop, they accessed Oracle. The users were complaining that Oracle was slow. You could imagine within Oracle, the user is spending pretty much all of their time clicking menu options, typing keystrokes, etc. You kind of think if it was yourself and maybe you were on your desktop and browsing the web, or maybe even working within Word, and suddenly everything goes slow right away, you kind of blame the application, even though it may not be the app. It may be what's providing access to that app. So yeah, those users were complaining of Oracle slowness, but in fact, it turns out in this scenario that the slowness was not the app itself, it was the actual VDI desktop. It was under resource constraint. So there was a bit of work involved. You could imagine if the organization did not have any sort of evidence or data to tell them, then it would be pretty difficult, and you might find yourself in scenarios where you are finger pointing. One of the things Kerry mentioned. Now, this client did have Goliath, so they were actually able to reach root cause a lot faster. And yeah, it might be a good time, Martin, if you were able to show in this sort of scenario how Goliath did help.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you guys will see if you haven't seen the Goliath Performance Monitor before, one of the key capabilities is to be able to see end user experience, both live and retained historically across 100% of your users. That means if that complaint comes in from a clinician, for example, they're clicking into, let's call it the Oracle hosted environment, they're saying, say, PowerChart is slow, right? We're able to come in here and very quickly, say, for example, put in that user's name, see all of their connections over a period of time, and be able to drill in further, say, historically, if that complaint is from 2 weeks ago. You know how punctual end users can be about their complaints around performance. But for each and every session, then able to click in, be able to see the entire performance of the Citrix session, in this case, out to the Oracle environment. And if they're accessing from something like an Omnissa VDI, you'll see that, say, VDI is our client device, out to your hosted app server, and the health of the entire connection from initial logon through performance across the entirety of the session, even if that's multiple hours, and tightly correlated with the performance of the hosting machine. So in this case, say a hosted application server how its utilization is doing, and then of course able to drill in with our tabs along the top to things like logon performance and protocol performance, as well as even performance of that host server. Now, the key piece here is that this is only one half of the equation, right? When we're dealing with a hosted resource and we're, say, launching Citrix out of the VDI, this is only the second half. Now, of course, this is a really important half because a lot of times the client environment, say if you're the hospital IT here, don't necessarily have visibility into the performance of a hosted machine or that connection out of your data center into the hosted data center. So this type of visibility tends to be invaluable for our customers to be able to see, for example, maybe the issue isn't here, right? If I'm looking at something like latency, I have maybe one spike going on in this particular session, but the rest of our performance may look perfectly fine. This is where we need to see both halves of this sort of double hop scenario that we might call it to truly understand the entirety of the issue. And luckily, Goliath is able to pull in all of that data for us. Simply under the other section, my views tab here, I can go into a Omnissa Horizon dedicated section where then I have all of my VDI sessions that are being launched. My demo lab does have RDSH as opposed to VDI, but you guys will understand the workflow hopefully pretty clearly here. Able to then see a user session from their client device. Maybe you're leveraging thin clients or even zero clients at a clinical location, then connecting into your host VDI and seeing that performance for the user from their client device all the way through to that VDI. And it was a case exactly like this, with both halves being able to pull a single user session from the first hop into their local data center, and then that second hop out into the hosted data center, where we could truly identify the issue, which in this case that George is kind of talking about here, ended up being an actual memory constraint on an entire pool of VDI. And so you can just imagine, without having visibility like this, it can be pretty hard, especially when the complaint is power chart. You end up going over, say, to your Cerner resources, you're escalating over to the hosted environment, when in actuality, if you were able to see both sides, or you knew to go to, say, your VDI team, you could then come in and see all of the performance across all the VDI coming into the environment and see the compared, say, memory constraint here. And it was this exact scenario where all of this was red and in the 90% for all of the users leveraging the same VDI pool. We were then able to see that changes were needed to the image optimizations to be able to handle kind of the increased resource demand that users were actually causing on those machines.
Again, just to tie that back, the ability to correlate all this is what helped them solve the issue, right, George? Like it was, everybody's got their own monitor, like their Omnissa stack. I think they were using Omnissa. You know, they have monitoring tools for that. They had monitoring tools for Citrix. They had network monitoring tools, but because none of it was correlating and they couldn't see how it was all coming together for the individual users who were being impacted, it left them blind, even with all of those monitoring tools. So this is sort of some of the secret sauce, is that ability to pull it together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a massive help when you have that correlation.
All right, let's move on to the next example.
Sure. So the next example, this is one that's rather large environments, multiple different use cases. We had the use cases split, by delivery group for this one. The environment worked well, I think, in most cases. Now there was some noise coming from a particular use case or user group. Let's say they were an offshore office that's probably made up of about, I guess, 300 users or so, pretty sizable. They were complaining about Citrix being slow. Citrix was slow, or they were having connectivity issues, cannot launch their desktops. This was all published desktops. Slowness, latency, all the usual kind of things that you would see, when you're supporting Citrix. Now, those users were providing quite a critical function and service to the business. So they had a little bit of leverage when it come to, you know, getting, I guess, visibility across and awareness across to upper management. So when they started to say that things were slow, it got the attention of upper management, again, because of their criticality to the business. Now, whilst they were saying that Citrix was slow, management started to believe that perhaps the Citrix environment was slow in its entirety, which wasn't the case because, again, this was just one use case. We had several hundred of other users performing different functions, different desktop pools, etc., but they were all, sized and configured similarly. And those users we weren't hearing the same complaints about. So we knew, based on working in the environment day to day and hearing the noise from the entire user community, that this wasn't a environment-wide issue, and it was just specific to a group. However, we didn't have the monitoring solution in place. We didn't have the data. We didn't have the evidence. We couldn't go and say, hey, actually, it's only this group of users and everyone else is, receiving an acceptable experience. But yeah, as I said, management did have a suspicion that in the platform as a whole had issues. They were starting to doubt how it was architected, how it was even sized, and how, obviously it was performing. It got to the point where they wanted a third-party validation, right? So they engaged a third-party company to come in and provide a health check across the environment to dispel their concerns. Now, that health check actually did pass with flying colors. The environment was well architected. It was well sized. It had all the different Citrix best practices that were current at that time. So that was obviously a good outcome. However, just to get that report, it obviously cost money, it cost time, and it didn't fix the issue. Those users still had the problem. It just, again, allowed management to see that actually the environment was working and at least architected, sized as it should be. Now, the issue, whilst IT and people like myself, we had a suspicion that it was a network connectivity issue. We knew some users were coming in over VPN and doing weird and wonderful ways of connecting into the environment. And we had that suspicion, but again, we couldn't prove exactly, again, without the management or without the monitoring solution. It's a little bit difficult to pinpoint and prove the actual root cause. So, having a solution such as Goliath would have absolutely got to the root cause much quicker, would have probably avoided having to engage third-party companies to come in and do health checks and all that additional expenditure that would, entail as well. So, yeah, that was an interesting scenario, but one that's very common, especially when you don't have the data to back it up.
Martin, how would you, if they'd had Goliath in place, George, Martin, why don't you guys walk through what troubleshooting would look like with the right data?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And George, I can kind of probably imagine, but you can better validate for me, if you're in the shoes of, say, a system administrator or somebody who's put together and managing this environment on a day-to-day, if your director's coming down saying that Citrix is not performing well, the environment that you put together or managing on a day-to-day is not performing well, what, without data to summarize every user, right, every connection coming in, what can you do to possibly defend that environment from, having to spend the time and effort that it takes to bring in a third-party consulting firm to do the health check and get that proof that otherwise, will require a lot of effort, right? I imagine that's a pretty difficult spot to be in.
Yeah, I mean, you have things like director and well, kind of only you have director and or monitor. But yeah, I find it's a lot of director and monitor functionality is good for real time reporting. You can get log on duration, maybe some things around connectivity, but even if you want to look at latency, we can't pull a report and say, here's what this user experienced from a latency perspective on Tuesday of last week. It's only real time that we can capture that data. So you'd have to literally spend your time eyeballing the console in real time, capturing latency across multiple users. And if you got 1,000, which in this case we did, it's not practical at all. It's never going to work. So yeah, we absolutely, in that scenario, we need a third party solution, which is capturing tons of different data points and being able to historically store that and report on it as well, which it looks like, in these reports from Goliath, absolutely will be able to correlate that and show who's receiving a good experience and who's not.
Exactly, right? So the screen that I'm sharing up now is one of the reports that comes out of the Goliath Performance Monitor here. And its entire purpose is toward that end of how can I tell what end user experience looks like across time for all users? Who's having issues? How frequently or how long are those issues lasting? And of course, where is my root cause if there is even a subset of users having problems? What you're seeing here is a fault isolation analytics report that does all of that work in a single pane of glass for you, able to generate on a scheduled basis and even deliver to your inbox. This is regularly done at our clients for, say, every week or even every day, spitting out a total assessment of all users across the environment. In this example's a little bit larger than 1,000 users even, then able to take all of the experience, again, across 100% of Citrix sessions launched into the environment over time, in this case, a 30-day report, pulling in every single session that these users have had and comparing key performance indicators against Citrix best practices so that we can definitively tell where issues might be happening, as well as elicit a score based on those thresholds to align how good of an end user experience users might be having. And in this case, able to sort this low to high very simply so that we can see upfront not only an assessment of how widespread issues might be, because if that word is coming down from management that Citrix is really having a problem, you need to investigate why everything's bad for everyone, right? You can quantifiably say that, well, it's not everyone. It's a certain percentage of our users, and those issues are tracking to a particular root cause. For example, maybe the network or maybe even available bandwidth. And if we have that hunch or a suspicion that we have users coming in over VPN, over wild and wacky connections, just like you said, George, this is going to be that source of truth that we can pull in and show every user, compare users with good experiences to those with the worst right up top. And in this report right here, extremely simple to see that if our important names, the folks in the ear of our IT director, or even in some cases we've heard CIO, right, coming down on you, you can know that these users are not, falsifying their claims. They're certainly having a poor experience. However, one or two users from a certain department or location having an issue is a much different scenario than the entire environment performing poorly. And so we can see extremely quickly in this type of report where our issues are coming from, who's in the red with those low scores. And if you'll notice over here toward the client addresses, everything changed for custom privacy here, but able to see a consistent IP address. In this particular scenario, this is exactly what it looks like when we have users from a particular location or coming over a certain connection type, exactly like, say, a VPN subnet, that would cause poor connectivity, leading to terrible performance for those users in their session. So we can validate those users' complaints, understand how broad that issue is impacting our users, and then, of course, get down to that root cause in a single glance so that we can provide definitive proof that we know where the issue is and we can work on fixing it. One other point I will make, because since you mentioned in there, George, the need for a health check, right? The ability to say and prove that my environment is working as intended or is configured to industry best practices. Goliath even provides the ability to execute that type of health check on demand or on a regular basis as well. You'll see another one of our reports here that allows Goliath to go out and check your entire environment, all of your VDAs, your delivery infrastructure machines, for those best practices put together by our consultants, and George is actually part of the team here, to check for those environments that our consultants would be coming in to check for anyway. So in a simple report generated in just minutes, as opposed to, say, weeks of consultation and working with external vendors, you're able to pull together that exact output that management needs to validate the performance or configuration of the environment. If anything's out of place, Goliath can also tell you exactly where it's out of place and how to fix it via our resolution notes here, so you can see if there is an issue, what impact that issue might have, and how to fix it, so that we can make sure our environment passes our check with flying colors here, validate configuration of the environment, and bring that all the way back to the actual end user experience that's happening as a result here. So the troubleshooting workflow here would be, I don't know, George, how long? Maybe 5-10 minutes with reports like this?
Absolutely, yeah. And as you say, not only can we show a report which, describes who's experiencing or who's getting a bad experience and who's getting a good experience, but we can also prove that the environment's well configured. So we're kind of tackling both with just simple reports.
Yeah, very little time spent on trying to chase this types of issue down. It certainly beats watching a live dashboard for hours on end trying to figure this type of stuff out.
Yep. Yeah, these are all built-in reports, so there's very little customization, or you can obviously choose some custom options in terms of who you want to report on, so you can report on certain delivery groups, etc. But it's all very automated and then pretty easy to pull reports, so it literally takes minutes rather than hours.
Absolutely. One other thing I did want to point out here is actually a new feature for you all. If you guys have seen the Goliath Performance Monitor here as we're going through it today, one upcoming improvement to the technology that we'll be rolling out in the next release, I believe, here soon, is going to be an actual refresh to our UI. This is actually going to allow you to streamline the entire workflow even further. So you don't even have to wait to generate a report or schedule that to run in order to get the type of insight. Instead, you'll be able to gather the type of insight of what does user experience look like, where are my users being impacted, from a single view. This is going to be a new UI available for the Goliath Performance Monitor here upcoming, and this is going to allow you to give that type of same insight, except this time with the ability to drill into those issues. So let's say, for example, that issue comes down from our director, right? That we have a issue with Citrix, it's not performing well. All it would take in this point is to load into your Goliath Performance Monitor console, see the entire performance of users across the entire environment, validate that issues might not be widespread, and then drill in to users who might be having issues. And at this point, see those individual users, where they're coming from, and those similar, say, IP ranges that might correspond to something like a VPN connection, with the full ability to drill down into this type of issue as well, to get down into full root cause analysis with things like the connectivity trends and latencies on a per user and per session basis. So figured I'd show this as a pretty exciting new improvement to the technology here. Going to even include some automated root cause analysis for you, so you can kind of identify exactly where issues are coming from, even at the granular level, with still minimal time spent.
Yeah, so if you're currently a Goliath customer and you'd like to get a little bit more than just a 30-second sneak peek as to what the new UI entails, you can just put UI in the question and answer, and we'll make sure that we contact you and set some time up so that you can actually get a closer look.
Awesome. I'll move on to the next scenario then, which is logon slowness. Again, a very common issue for a Citrix admin. I guess another common scenario is upgrading from Windows 10 to Windows 11. So if you've been running Windows 10 VDI, you're either on that journey or hopefully you've already completed the journey to upgrading to Windows 11, which always has a little bumps on the road. So one of those that we experienced was whilst we were upgrading to Windows 11, logon times were considerably slower. I wouldn't say, I mean, the Windows 10 logons weren't great either, but when you build a brand new Windows 11 image, you kind of expect that it'll be nice, it'll be fresh. Logons should be lower, but in this case, they were still, I think, over, well, at least 90 seconds to 2 minutes. So it wasn't great. And we knew that, you know, before we onboarded users in mass, that we wanted to look at this. You know, at that point, we had only a couple of users testing this solution before the wider group were migrated. So it was a good opportunity to figure out what was causing the slowness. So this customer did also have Goliath. Right away, we just thought, okay, let's go to Goliath, check the login statistics for the users. As Martin's shown already, we can drill down into specific users. So we were able to drill down into specific users and see what exactly was causing the login slowness. Now, right away, we could see that that component which was causing the slowness was group policy, which is a very common component to cause slowness at logins. So rather than trailing through event logs or any other type of logs like profile management logs, etc., we just pretty much got straight to the point of saying, right, it's group policy. We know now where we need to look. And it was actually a printer policy. So in this scenario, there was a couple of printer drivers which were simply missing from the Windows 11 builds. So when users were logging in, that GPO was trying to map a couple printers. I think there was 4 or 5 printers in total, but they did share drivers. So 4 or 5 printers, maybe 3 maximum drivers. But yeah, the printers would not map because the drivers were missing. And I think that the printer mapping failures were at least 30 to 60 seconds of slowness added on just because of that. So, you know, right away, we were able to see that we needed some drivers installed. So we went ahead, done our image updates with those drivers installed, and the login times were reduced down to, there was around 40 to 50 seconds total. So yeah, I always talk about GPU. When I'm talking about login slowness, we always talk about group policy being a culprit. Printers, drive maps, that sort of thing that can really trip up environments. It's such a simple thing, but you know, it's easy to encounter such issues, particularly when you are building out new systems and new operating systems. But thankfully, in this scenario again, we were able to really find root cause a lot quicker than we would if we didn't have a third-party monitoring solution. So Martin, yeah, you're already on the screen that I was talking about where we've seen that GPO slowness. So I'll hand it over to you. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. So yeah, as George was walking through that, I kind of walked through a little bit of what we normally do in that type of scenario, right? If we're worried about logon times in general, we'll normally start with something like our logon duration scorecard. It's going to baseline all users and their logons against our best practices. Again, defined by Citrix best practices off the bat, can always be customized to your specific expectations. And that in that scenario where, George, you talk about, right, we're spinning up a new image, we've got a new Windows 11 desktop, we're hoping things will be fresh, good, clean, and smooth, right? But if we encounter that scenario where we have users with less than optimal logons in a certain scenario, right? It's very common for us to take maybe 1 or 2 of those users, grab that name out of our scorecard here, and be able to do a full drill in and analysis on our session view right back here, where we have, again, full visibility into every single one of those sessions that comes into the environment. Looking back at all the user sessions over time, I can see where our average logon is creeping up here, be able to identify if there's something different about their connection off the bat, but oftentimes need to just drill in 2 clicks down to essentially root cause here to get a full breakdown of the logon here. This is going to pull in every single stage of the Citrix logon process, from initial brokering all the way through to hand off a keyboard and mouse to that user in session. You can see every single one of these stages, and again, historically retained, no need for you to go digging through any logs or any sort of script running, anything like that to be able to get this type of data. Goliath's putting it all together and retaining, again, that handshake, domain controller response, and that all important, as George, you ran into, group policy execution, where we can break down by policy exactly what those execution times look like. And I've even seen it myself at a number of clients recently, where that print policy or drive map extensions here are taking an exorbitant amount of time. You have a really long dark blue bar that's sitting here driving up your logons. And so in a single click or two here into the logon process, to be realistic, you have your culprit as to exactly what that issue is. Now, of course, there's two potential ways to go here, right? We can drill in further to understand exactly what is wrong with that policy in our user session. And we can also zoom out a bit to understand who else is being impacted by this type of issue. Both of those possible in just a couple more clicks here in the product. Underneath group policy, as we're looking at something like a policy extension that's taking an exorbitant amount of time, you luckily have access to all of the event logs that were occurring during this user's session. So we can simply drill in there to understand what was happening at 1:03 p.m. while this policy was going on to understand our issue. That way you can see exactly which print drivers were being looked for by the policy, since it's going to be publishing its failures in the event log, and exactly where those failures were occurring. It's not uncommon for us to see things like that print policy timeout occurring for our user session. So again, illustrating in those things like logs, be able to go in and you'll see print auto creation failed, what driver we're mapping, what client device is associated here, and validate that against the client device in use. Now, of course, if we start to see a really big storm of these events, and especially those failed to map, can't find driver, print policy timeout is thousands of milliseconds, as it normally says here, you have your exact evidence. Now, you can even screenshot, pass on to the folks who might be in charge of print policy, or if it's yourself, you have the exact data to take action on to understand what is being done from that VDI and by that policy. So that's workflow one, to understand where our group policy impact is coming from that might be impacting our end users logon. Scenario two here, where we need to zoom out a bit, is accomplished by our reports here in the product. So again, you can always drill into each and every one of those sessions, but a lot of times, if we're looking at a wider set of users and we have a whole bunch of these long logons populating our screen, because maybe we do have a widespread issue, we'll want to understand every single one of those users impacted. So coming back to our reports, we can always take a peek right here at our logon duration scorecard to see who else is sitting in that category of a much higher logon. Or even more specifically, as you get down into the sort of weeds of it, we have even more advanced reports, like those that can break down every single stage of the logon of every logon over a period of time. Pick this for a day or a week or so, and you have every single logon that can then be sorted by, say, group policy time right here. Top to bottom, you then have every single logon. Pull the users that are affected by a logon or group policy time over a certain threshold, and you're done. You have your entire list of users who are impacted by that policy that we can then go ahead and take a look at or make adjustments for so that we can better affect the situation. All of this, again, in just a couple of clicks, a quick report that takes about 3 seconds to generate, and we're all set. This exact report, even we ran into it with a healthcare customer, a little bit different than group policy, but was a profile configuration issue here. This report was able to identify over 3,000 profiles, users that had a poor configuration that were able to pull out, and otherwise would have been a whack-a-mole game to understand when those issues are cropping up and troubleshoot the same thing over and over again as you might do without a tool like this.
Martin, do you have the new speed and reliability report that's going to be coming out soon? These reports, so you showed this logon duration scorecard. You showed the Citrix fault isolation analytics. We've got this new end user experience scorecard that's coming out. One of the beautiful things you can do with these, and George, this is a great example. You were migrating from Windows 10 to Windows 11, so you were making a planned change in the environment. So baselining before and after becomes a really valuable scenario. And when you're doing it, this, for instance, this new speed and reliability report, you can see it by groups, you can see it by locations. So, Martin was talking about zooming out a little bit to start to see, congregated groups of users and where they're located who are having good, bad, or somewhere in between experiences. It makes it easier for you to understand sort of what the before and after is. So if there's a change for the worse, you can dig right into it. One question that I have for you, George. So we've gone through 3 scenarios so far. 2 scenarios, customers had Goliath. 1 scenario, customer did not have Goliath. The issue with the VPN and the offshore, they did not have Goliath, if I remember correctly. How much time did that issue take to figure? Well, I mean, I know they went in, they had to have someone come in and do the health check. Like start to finish, how long did it take them to troubleshoot the issue before they figured out, yes, it was a VPN issue, with this particular group of offshore workers? Was that weeks? Was it days, months?
Yeah. No, I think it was probably in a region of around 6 weeks. The health check and reporting and aspect, it in itself took a good part of 2.5 weeks to get the health check done. You kind of think where it starts off. The consultant comes in, they need to get access into the environment. They have a whole bunch of questions. They spend time, once they've got access, trawling through the consoles, collecting the data, maybe interviewing some users, whatever. And then you have all this data. Then you kind of got to compile and align to what's good and what's bad, and that goes into a report. The report gets fed back to management, and there'll maybe be some remedial actions to follow up on from that report, depending on the findings. So yeah, it's really not an overnight thing. It's something that can in itself can take some time. So I think end to end, we on that issue we were talking 6 weeks. I think it was a rough time scale.
Versus, if they had Goliath at the time, how quickly do you think that they would have been able to solve it? Martin, you might be able to help with this, just being in it day to day with a lot of customers to get to that, to identify, leveraging these reports that we have, leveraging the data correlation that we have, the automated Citrix health checks that we have. This is maybe a couple of days before they have everything in there and they have enough information to definitively say, maybe not even days, maybe it's faster than that.
Yeah, I guess they'd already have the data. If they had Goliath running from, day 1 or soon after. And I think, the whole health check situation came off the back of management. They had a worry that the entire environment was not performing well. With the reporting, the end user experience scorecards, the logon duration scorecards, we could quickly prove, again, within minutes, not even days, within minutes, we could run off reports and say, hey, from these X amount of users, the percentage of users that are actually experiencing poor performance, poor logins, whatever, is maybe 10% of the overall user base. And again, that can be done in minutes with the reporting.
Yeah, and that's part of where this report that Martin's showing right now becomes valuable, because you can see sort of the distribution of users who are having the various degrees of end user experience. So, in this case, you've got 10 users in this group. So, roughly 10% of the users are having a poor experience. The vast majority are, actually it's not 10%, it's the total users is higher, the total user count is higher. But you can see sort of that distribution, like, okay, this isn't organization-wide. Here are the 10 users that are having the worst experience. Let's dig into those 10 users and see exactly what's going on. In this case, you can see right now it's tied to user location. Like in this example in this report, for the most part, it's tied to user location. So it's easy right there to start to pinpoint your troubleshooting there. All right, we're getting close on time. I want to get to that last scenario. So sorry for that little bit of a detour, but it just dawned on me as we were going through this. You're talking about a couple of scenarios where it was very easy for customers to find out where the issues were. One scenario where it wasn't. And we didn't talk about how long that took, but when I was thinking about it, I'm like, wow, they brought a third party in to do the health check. That took some time. And they probably took a lot of time before they got to the point where they're like, we need to bring somebody else in. And then after they finished it all, it still didn't solve the problem. So that took more time. So sorry again for that detour, but I just wanted to kind of identify the delta there. All right, last scenario.
Sure. Last scenario was for an Epic client. So yeah, upgrades. Anyone that manages Epic will know that there's always an upgrade on the horizon. In this scenario, we were doing an upgrade on a weekend, as typically you will do in health when usage of the environment is at its lowest point. So Epic was disabled for access the production Epic environments, the icons, Citrix icons, if you like. So the users, of course, could not attempt to access those icons whilst the upgrade was happening. Now, what happened in this scenario was after the upgrade was complete, there was a mistake, an oversight on re-enabling the icons, so re-releasing the icons back to the population. And that was missed. Therefore, as a result, Epic was not available quite when it, or as early as it maybe should have been. Now, in this environment, the Goliath GAM product, or Application Availability Monitor product, was running. Now, what GAM is it's basically, you could think of it as like an agent, which is continuously, repetitively launching application resources. So you can create that can be applications or desktops, but you create your own schedule, and this agent will repeatedly launch or attempt to launch the resource. Now, it not just launches a resource, it also captures the steps. So obviously there's many different steps that it takes to get to your resource. So it monitors all of those, captures those, the timings, it takes screenshots if there's any failures in that. So maybe the GAM product has clicked an icon, but it never received an ICA file, or maybe it had received the ICA file, but the connection could not be established. So those types of flows in the overall end-to-end connection is captured, screenshotted, and if any of those points fail, you will get alerted. So it's a little bit like an early warning detection system. And in this scenario, GAM was really useful because it was able to alert that it could not access Epic when everyone thought that it should be possible. So in that scenario, we were able to quickly go in, figure out what the problem was by just looking at the screenshots that GAM provided and the error detail, and then re-enable Epic. Now, if we had missed that, say GAM was not available and it was missed for a longer period, it could have had a real, serious impact on the organization. You think of this organization, their peak concurrency was around 25,000 staff. Now, we didn't have that concurrency during the upgrade, of course, over the weekend, but if it had been missed for much longer, you would start to run into those higher usage scenarios. And it's even more critical when it's healthcare, right? Because clinician can't launch Epic, they can't provide the right level of patient care that that patient deserves. So it has a lot of different impacts, and thankfully with GAM we were able to detect that quickly. So yeah, that was the last scenario. Martin, were you able to show the GAM product?
Yeah, absolutely. So exactly where you're talking about, right? Application availability deployed to a couple of different locations, launching those real sessions. And in your scenario, right, we get an alert. The technology is able to send, whether it's an email, create an incident in your ITSM tool, however you best intake that information to be able to get it to your teams. As soon as you get that alert, you can link directly into the product here, where then you have full visibility into the launch history, historical context as to when the issue started happening. So in the scenario of our upgrade, as application availability is testing from our different locations, and against our different applications, we can see which ones started to fail across one or multiple locations. And in each of those scenarios, whether it's a slow logon or in this case, a failure would be rated probably the enumeration stage if it's not published, you can click in. With a single click, without having to interface with a user, you can understand exactly what the workflow would look like for a user from a synthetic standpoint, making it through our storefront, validating that, say, authentication does in fact work. We can get to storefront, and as we're looking for our applications, we might see a resource not found. You can then go into our screenshot, see what types of errors, pop-ups, or maybe just the missing tile that might be there in the case of our upgrade scenario here, that application availability can catch for us and let us know exactly where the issue is ahead of those tickets coming in and thousands of users being impacted. So whether it's something missing on that storefront or any other issue, like you mentioned, maybe can't launch the ICA file or it's not being served, any of those types of issues are caught here with full screenshot and logging along the way so that we know exactly where that issue is occurring, how long it's been happening for, and which locations it's impacting, all in a single dashboard right here. I don't want to talk too long on here. I know we only have a couple of minutes left here. So Carrie, I'll probably pass things back to you unless we want to cover anything else here on the application availability early warning piece.
No, I think this is good. We've got some questions. We've got just a couple of minutes left. I want to go ahead and take control back if you don't mind, Martin.
Go for it.
All right. Apologies, my platform is loading a little bit slow. Here we go. You should be good now. You guys preloaded some questions. We've had some good questions coming in during the session as well. One that I wanted to touch on quickly was, it came up a couple of times when we were talking about benchmarking. The question was, how long is data stored for? So if they're looking to benchmark over a period of time, how long is data stored for? So Martin, you want to take that?
Yeah, great question. And not to give the consultative answer, but it sort of depends. Out of the box, Goliath's going to retain your data for up to about 30 days, and if you don't change anything. But all of those settings are completely changeable. So most clients will keep their historical granular data for anywhere from 30 to 90 days. And then we'll also offer roll-ups to go even further, report on, and get data as far back as a year.
Another question came in. It's got to do with the deployment. I think their primary question is does it require an agent on the endpoints? That's what they're getting at, I believe.
Oh, yeah. So nothing required on your endpoints, to be clear there. So if you've got your thin clients, zero clients, whatever you're working with, no worries on needing to deploy things to your endpoints. You actually already have. It's called Workspace or the Omnissa client. You'll be able to deploy the Goliath Lightweight Intelligent Agent to your session hosts, where we get all the data you've seen today and the full ability to analyze and report on user experience.
Another question, unrelated but related, do we have anything for the endpoints? So for that, I would say if you are looking for something for your endpoints, we can absolutely talk to you about that. That's a different conversation for more time than we have to cover in this session, but just that's something that you're interested in, just type endpoint into the question and answer panel, and we'll go ahead and follow up with you on that. Another question around the health checks. So the question was, how long does it take to deploy the health check? So I think this is, Martin, probably a nuanced question. I don't know offhand if this person is a customer or not a customer, but I think the answer depends on that.
Exactly. Depends on if you have Goliath already in place. If you don't already have Goliath in place, it takes just a few hours to set up the technology. It's really a two-server, set up a server, establish a database, get it going. After that, the health check takes about 15 minutes to get in place and fully deployed to your environment.
Okay. We are at time. There are links in the chat if anybody is interested in a demo or trial or just wants to have a further conversation. You can use one of the links in the chat. Also, at the end of the webinar, when you log off, there's a quick survey. If you wouldn't mind taking just about 30 seconds to fill that out, again, it helps us with making sure we're delivering content that is relevant to you all. So with that, thank you all for joining the session. George, thank you for joining us again. Martin, great job walking through sort of examples of the scenarios that George went through with some of his clients. And thank you all for joining, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, all.
Thank you, everybody.